since he's a fan. But Evan Miyakawa joins us now, and Evan, I'll tell you, so early in the morning, I got up early this morning, and I was very worried about this show because I had nothing booked yet. And within a matter of like an hour, I got all four of our guests, and it's turned out to be one of the easier ones because I am flying solo this week without the smoke. So it's sometimes a little harder to do those, and I'm so glad that you were available because it does seem like a slow time when it comes to basketball news, but college basketball wise, the portal is still open. There are still, at least as far as people making their decisions, people can't go in, but they can make their decisions. The draft, camps are over and people have made their decisions on coming and going. And you had the rankings up of teams, but first off, I want to talk about a couple things that are kind of in the water right now, namely Coleman Hawkins, who's your second ranked transfer. Where do you think his arrow is pointing?
That's a great question. I love Coleman Hawkins. I have him ranked as the second best transfer in the entire country out of all the players who've entered the portal. I think, he can be a little erratic at times, but his skill set is undeniable and he can do a lot on both ends of the court. There's a lot of different rumors floating around. Some of them have been sort of juiced up by Coleman himself in terms of being linked with different schools. He's definitely not shied away from playing around a little bit with different fan bases. So I don't necessarily have a huge indication of where he's most likely to go, but I do really like the link with Louisville. If Pat Kelsey can get him at Louisville, I've already been extremely impressed with the work that he's done in the portal, having to completely restructure his entire roster from scratch. But getting Coleman Hawkins, that would just put an entirely different cast on their projection for next year, because Coleman is going to be one of the top players in the country next season on my website in the preseason, and hopefully will kind of play at a close to All-American level for whatever team he joins. And so if he joins Louisville, I would love that for them. The rumors have been circulating the last day or two about, him visiting there. I got a question from Louisville a couple days before that, directly from their coaching staff, asking, hey, if we got Coleman Hawkins, would that move us to the number one ranked transfer class on your website? So they've certainly been looking forward to this for a while and really hoping that they can get him to come and play for the Cards.
Well, they have 12 guys coming in already, right? That you had, and that you on your list of quality over quantity. Well, they kind of hit. They're the ones who hit quantity and quality together. Them in Kentucky, right?
Yes, that's correct. It is hard in this day and age to completely rebuild an entire roster from scratch and have all the guys that you're bringing in be really high quality. And so I really like the fact that Louisville has gotten guys who are both going to fill up their roster, and none of them are any slouches. I really like all of them at the high major level. I think they're going to have a lot of depth. Certainly Coleman Hawkins would be the best of the bunch by a good distance there, but they've already got a good setup behind him, sort of regardless of whether he comes or goes somewhere else.
Elmarko Jackson injured here recently. He'll be out for the season for Kansas. They brought in a transfer today from Mississippi State in Shaquille Moore. So he steps into that backup role, and he's a senior, and that's going to be valuable to them. Where do you rank Kansas's class in that? I noticed they're not in the quantity over quality rankings that you had.
Yeah, right now I have their incoming transfer class without the signing of Shaquille Moore as top 20 in the country, which for some people might be a little bit low. My system is not quite as high on guys like Zeke Mayo, for example, as some other national outlets have them. I really like Rylan Griffin a lot, the wing from Alabama. I think he's going to be a huge piece for them. So with the addition of Moore, once I recalculate that, I certainly think that'll move them into the top 15. Maybe perennially the top 10. I think there's an argument some people are making the argument that Kansas has or is close to having a top 5 or potentially even the best transfer class. I definitely wouldn't go that far based on what the numbers say, but it's certainly been some good work for them as typically is the case for Bill Self teams. I think the loss of Elmarko Jackson, to me, that doesn't necessarily change my outlook for them a whole lot in terms of where they're likely to land, but I certainly do think it takes away a lot of the potential of this team. I think a trend that we've seen for Bill Self teams the last several years is veteran leadership and then one or two young guys who really, sort of shine or outperform expectations in a given year. And as the season goes along, really add an extra punch. I mean, you look at Johnny Furphy last year. He was an example of a freshman who kind of started out slow and ended up being a big piece for them. So they've had players like that in the past. I think Elmarko Jackson was a little underwhelming his freshman year. If he had been healthy this upcoming season, I really liked the idea of him kind of coming out of nowhere and being a really, really important piece for them. So I certainly think it hurts them a little bit not having him. I'm not super concerned about their floor per se, but certainly their high-end ceiling potential for where the season could go is hurt a little bit by the fact that he's going to miss the year.
You have at the top of your quality over quantity, you have St. John's, and Rick Pitino has been tasked with making that program relevant again. And it's been a long time since they have been, and they're in New York City, which is supposedly the basketball mecca, and not been winning titles. Look, Villanova can do it in Philly. St. John's can actually do it in New York. What have you liked about their class and the guys that they have brought in? And they are spending a lot of NIL money.
Yeah, they definitely are. I think the thing I love about what St. John's has done for the portal is Rick Pitino's recognized that in his second year there, they need to add pieces to the portal, but it needs to be the right pieces. And so when you look at the guys they've brought in 4 transfers, and 2 in particular, Kadari Richmond, who I have ranked as the best player in the entire portal, and then Davon Smith, who's a guard coming from Utah, who I have ranked in the top 15 of all players in the portal. I think both those guys are really high-quality adds. I'm super intrigued to see what that backcourt looks like, because you can make an argument that Kadari Richmond and Davon Smith sort of play the same position. So I'm kind of curious to see how they play off the ball with each other. But certainly Rick Pitino knows what he's doing coaching-wise, so he'll figure it out. But a lot of what St. John's has done is getting the right 4 guys, but then also being really high quality, specifically with those 2 in particular sort of leading the way. I'm really impressed with what they're doing. And I think in this day and age, having some guys who can sort of add to your team from the portal, but not having to totally rely on a complete rebuild through the portal, but having guys return to your team and having potentially some freshman talent coming in as well, sort of the mix of all 3 is really important. And I think St. John's is kind of trying to chase that formula this offseason.
A couple other guys I want to ask you about. Wugla Poplar from Miami is going to Villanova, so that's a boon for them. And Jameer Watkins, who is visiting St. John's in Michigan. He's an FSU guy. Still a chance he could go back to FSU. Also, maybe going to visit K-State and Cincinnati as well. What do you think about those 2?
Yeah, Wugla Poplar certainly was a good player for Miami. It's good for Villanova to get him. I don't have him ranked as high as other people do. My advanced metrics have him, I think, outside the top 100 players in the portal, whereas based on his stat line, some other people regard him as being better. But certainly I think he's going to be a useful piece for Villanova. Jameer Watkins, I have as one of the top, besides Coleman Hawkins, arguably the best name left in the portal. Out there with, Arthur Kaluma from Kansas State is in the mix too. But I certainly think Jameer Watkins is one of the, most coveted pieces in the portal. And I think the really interesting the part about the transfer portal era, specifically the way that this offseason, the last offseason have worked out, is that players who wait to commit late in the portal cycle, so toward the end of May, beginning of June, they demand such a higher dollar amount from NIL compared to if they were to commit to a school in, early April or mid-April, for example, just because teams realize, hey, we're still one piece, we're still 2 pieces short. Who's left in the portal who I can get? And the options are so much more scarce that they're willing to throw massive amounts of cash at really any good player who's left, even if they don't actually stack up that well compared to other players who have already committed to other teams. So I think the interesting part about like a Jameer Watkins, for example, is if he had committed to wherever in early April, we wouldn't really be talking about him that much. But because he's one of the only good names left, it's suddenly a huge conversation, and he's going to be paid like an elite player in college basketball, more so than some other players who, at least from a numbers perspective, would be evaluated higher than him. So it's just fascinating. I think from player perspective, the strategy of waiting this long in the portal has turned out to be a good decision, at least from a money-making perspective. for some of these sort of late portal decisions.
Bracky Cat on the chat is a huge Kansas State fan, and Jerome Tang has been doing some work. And the last time we had you on, we talked about Baylor, so I don't really have to ask about them again. I know how you feel about their class, but Kansas State in particular, if you had just told me they could have two of the three of Doug McDaniel, Max Jones, and Akor, I would have said, all right, well, he didn't really have to do much more, but, picked up the center from Kentucky and has really kind of rebuilt the depth there. What do you think about their class?
Yeah, I'm certainly impressed with what he's done. I think last year was a little bit of a step back for the program, but I think Jerome Tang has always been someone who has really been optimistic about getting big guys in the portal, big names to recruiting, and, causing a splash in the Big 12. Doug McDaniel was one of the earliest names in the transfer portal and one of the earliest commits in the portal to Kansas State. I have been ranked in the top 25 amongst all players in the portal. And, Michigan's season started out well and it sort of went downhill. But I think all season long, from a underlying metrics perspective, Doug McDaniel has a lot of value to wherever he was going to go. And certainly Jerome Tang has had success the last several seasons with smaller point guards running the show and just being dynamos on offense. So I'm certainly optimistic that Doug McDaniel can kind of do that for Kansas State. So certainly him headlining that class, but, getting against us through the portal, I think has been a much needed add for them as well, adding some length, some athleticism kind of on the interior of that lineup there. So impressed with what Jerome Tang's doing for sure.
And finally, Texas Tech, JT Toppin kind of put them over the top. That was maybe as perfect a transfer fit as I think I've ever seen. He's out after, he's in the portal after a year, jumps in, stays in West Texas, goes to Tech, and that should really help them, especially since they've kind of had to reform their roster a little bit. What do you think about their class?
Oh, I love their class. I have them ranked top 10 in the country in terms of incoming transfer class. And just in terms of the quality of guys that they're bringing in, they're all really high level. Three of their guys coming in are top 75 transfers. I have JT Toppin as a top 5 transfer in the entire country. He's one of the most exciting freshmen in the country last year, racking up, conference, freshman of the year honors in the Mountain West. He was extremely efficient as a forward. He averaged, basically almost a double-double. Super efficient. So I think he's a great add for Texas Tech, really fits what he's doing. And, given his elite high school recruiting profile as well, I think he can hit even another level next year. So I think he's going to be a huge add both offensively and defensively for them. So definitely he's the headliner of that class. But all things considered, they've done really good work. All
right, Evan, I know you have to go in a second, but we got one more question from the chat from Cuz, and he wants to know about West Virginia.
All right, let's pull up what West Virginia has done here. I think it certainly helps that, they have connections, from Drake with Coach DeVries coming in, and bringing in Tucker DeVries certainly makes a big difference. I have West Virginia's class ranked inside the top 15 in the country. I also have them 15th in the country in terms of overall transfer activity rank, which takes into account your incoming players minus your departing players, basically saying, did you make your team better through the portal or did you get worse? So West Virginia certainly is in the high positive category when it comes to that. I love Tucker DeVries. I think he's going to be a star. I'm really excited to see him playing in the Big 12. But they've also added a lot of other good players as well. They've got 2 commits coming from Illinois. Sincere Harris was kind of a role player for Illinois, but I've been sort of paying attention to him in his first 2 seasons at Illinois, just because I think he's a very good off-the-ball role player who does a lot sort of on the intangibles level, and that's definitely captured in terms of the stats that quantify how he impacts team performance. So I really like him as an addition. And overall, they've added 7 or 8 players to the portal. That's certainly hard to do, but they've added a lot of good quality as well as just kind of building their roster there.
Evan, thank you so much. I know that you got something going on. Thanks for hopping on with me today. Always love talking hoops with you, man. And then go to evanmaya.com. It's such an awesome site. So much information. And you get 3 tiers of subscription, so you can look at the free stuff, $20, $30, all a great deal, especially if you're a basketball junkie. Evan does a great job. Have a great one, Evan. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good, Paul. Thanks.
There you go. Evan Miyakawa with us here on 365 Sports. And Gary, we'll keep it here and go through some of the stuff we